The battlefield was silent, but the ruins told the story of a brutal war. The sky was dark with thick smoke, the air smelled of burning metal and scorched earth, and the ground was littered with debris. Human soldier Commander Darius Cole moved carefully through the wreckage, his boots crunching over broken stone and shattered weapons. His pulse was steady, his senses sharp. He had seen battlefields like this before. He knew the war was far from over. Darius had received orders to search for survivors, but deep inside, he knew the chances were low. The battle had ended hours ago, and anyone left behind was either dead or dying. His squad had split up to cover more ground, but he chose to move alone. Experience had taught him that sometimes the most important things were found in the quiet places. As he stepped over a fallen support beam, he saw something move in the shadows of a collapsed structure. It was weak, barely noticeable, but his sharp eyes caught it. Darius raised his weapon and moved closer. His training told him to be cautious. It could be a trap. Enemy forces sometimes left wounded soldiers as bait, hoping to lure in careless rescuers. But as he approached, he saw a figure curled up in the rubble. It was an alien girl, barely clinging to life. Her body was covered in burns and bruises, her silver eyes half open but unfocused. Her skin, a pale shade of violet, was marked with deep scratches and dried blood. She wore a torn battle uniform with insignias of the Valeri Empire, the very aliens who had been fighting against humans in this war. Darius hesitated. His instincts told him to move on, to leave her behind. She was the enemy, after all, but something inside him refused to let him ignore her suffering. He knelt beside her, checking her wounds. She was breathing, but just barely. She had lost too much blood, and without help, she wouldn't last much longer. Her lips moved, a weak whisper escaping. He leaned closer, barely catching her words. Help. It was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was a plea. Darius clenched his jaw. He had never seen a Valeri ask for help before. They were known for their arrogance, their cold, calculating ways. But this one was different, alone, abandoned, and desperate. He looked around. If she had been left behind, that meant her own people did not think she was worth saving. Something about that realization angered him. This is a bad idea, he muttered to himself. Ignoring his training, ignoring his orders, he made a decision. He lifted her into his arms, her body weak and fragile against his armor. She tensed at first, but she was too weak to fight. Darius activated his comms. "I got a survivor," he said. "Human." His squad mate's voice crackled through. "No." Silence on the other end. Then, "Leave her." Darius looked down at the girl in his arms. She had already lost consciousness, her breathing shallow. "No," he said firmly. "I'm bringing her back. Cole, she's the enemy. She's dying." A long pause, then a sigh. "Your call, Commander. But if she causes trouble, it's on you." Darius didn't answer. He secured his rifle, adjusted his grip on the alien girl, and started moving toward his hidden outpost. The journey would be difficult, and the risks were high. But something inside him told him he was doing the right thing. She was abandoned. She was wounded. But now she was his responsibility. The small outpost was hidden deep within the ruins, away from enemy patrols. It was nothing more than an abandoned underground bunker, reinforced with metal plates and makeshift defenses. Commander Darius Cole carried the unconscious alien girl inside, carefully laying her on a cot. The dim lights flickered as he grabbed his medkit. She was barely breathing. Her violet skin was cold, and her body trembled slightly. Darius knew she had lost too much blood. He had treated soldiers before, but never an alien. Would human medicine even work on her? "Guess we're about to find out," he muttered, pulling out a syringe filled with a basic healing stimulant. It was designed for humans, but he had seen it used on other alien species before. As he injected the serum into her arm, the girl flinched. A weak groan escaped her lips, and her silver eyes fluttered open for a moment. She stared at him, confused and afraid, then slipped back into unconsciousness. Darius sighed. She needed rest. The wounds on her body were bad, but not fatal anymore. She would survive if she didn't fight him when she woke up. He leaned back against the cold wall, running a hand through his short-cropped hair. His squad had called him crazy for bringing her here. Maybe they were right. The Valeri Empire was humanity's enemy. If his superiors found out about this, there would be consequences. But Darius had seen something in her eyes before she passed out. Not the cold arrogance of the Valeri, not the hatred that many of them carried for humans. He had seen fear, desperation, helplessness, and he could not turn his back on that. Hours passed. The bunker remained quiet, except for the occasional crackle of the radio. Darius stayed close, watching her for any signs of worsening conditions. Then, a sharp inhale. His eyes snapped to her face just as she jerked awake, gasping for air. Her silver eyes were wide, her breathing fast and uneven. For a moment, she looked around wildly, not realizing where she was. Then she saw him. She froze. Darius raised his hands, a universal sign of peace. "Easy," he said, his voice calm. "You're safe." She didn't move, her muscles tense, as if she was ready to run. But she was still too weak. Her eyes darted to her wounds, then back to him. "You." Her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "You saved me." Darius gave a small nod. "Yeah, you were bleeding out. I stopped it." She swallowed, her throat dry. "Why?" He hesitated. It was a simple question, but he didn't have a simple answer. "Because you were going to die," he said finally. The alien girl studied him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she tried to sit up, wincing in pain. Darius grabbed a water bottle from a nearby table and held it out to her. "Drink." She hesitated before taking it. Her fingers trembled slightly as she brought the bottle to her lips and drank small, careful sips. Darius watched her closely. "What's your name?" She lowered the bottle. Her voice was still weak, but she managed to answer. "Rilia." Darius nodded. "Rilia. I'm Commander Darius Cole." She tensed at the word commander. He wasn't surprised. To her, he was still the enemy. Rilia's fingers curled into the fabric of the blanket covering her. "My people, they left me, didn't they?" There was something in her voice, a quiet pain, one that went deeper than just her physical wounds. Darius sighed. He had seen the battlefield. He had seen the bodies left behind. And he had seen no one searching for her. "Yes," he said honestly. "They left you." She lowered her head, her silver eyes clouded. For a long moment, she didn't speak. Darius leaned forward slightly. "Why?" Rilia took a slow breath, then whispered, "Because I'm not important to them." Silence filled the bunker. Darius didn't know much about the Valeri Empire, but he knew they were ruled by strict caste systems. If they left her behind, it meant she was not considered valuable. It made him angry. No soldier should be abandoned. "You're alive," he said firmly. "That's what matters now." Rilia looked at him, her expression unreadable. "And what happens now?" Darius exhaled, leaning back. "That depends." Her eyes narrowed slightly. "On what?" "On whether you're going to fight me, or if you'll accept my help." Rilia stared at him for a long moment. Then, to his surprise, she nodded, just slightly. "All right," she said softly. "I'll trust you. For now." Darius smirked. "That's a start." She was still weak, still hurt, still an enemy of humanity. But in that moment, she was also just a survivor who needed help. And for now, that was enough. The bunker was quiet except for the low hum of the ventilation system. Darius Cole sat on a metal crate, cleaning his weapon, while Rilia remained on the cot, her wounds still healing. The dim lights cast shadows on the walls, making the place feel colder than it already was. For the past few hours, She had been watching him cautiously. She didn't trust him, not fully, but she no longer looked at him with the same fear she had before. Darius noticed her staring. He smirked. "If you got something to say, just say it." Rilia hesitated, then spoke. You really don't expect anything from me." He raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" She looked down, gripping the blanket over her lap. "Among my people, no one does anything for free. There's always an expectation, a trade, a price." Darius let out a breath. "Well, I hate to break it to you, but humans don't work that way." He leaned forward slightly. "At least, not all of us." Rilia studied him, searching for any sign of deception. When she found none, she finally whispered, "I don't understand humans." Darius chuckled. "That makes two of us." A faint, tired smile almost appeared on her face, but it disappeared quickly. She looked away, her expression becoming serious. "They will come looking for me." Darius frowned. "Your people?" She nodded. "Not to rescue me. To kill me." That caught his attention. "Why?" Rilia took a slow breath. "The Valeri Empire. They don't tolerate failure. I was part of an intelligence unit. We were supposed to send important data back to the Empire, but..." She swallowed hard. "Our mission failed. My entire squad was killed, and I was left behind." Darius narrowed his eyes. "That means you know something valuable." Rilia hesitated, then nodded. "Yes, but it's also the reason they want me dead. If they find me, they will eliminate me to ensure no one else gets the information." Darius exhaled sharply. He had seen ruthless tactics before, but abandoning your own and then hunting them down afterward. That was a new level of cruelty. "Then we need to get you out of here," he said. Rilia looked up at him, surprised. "We?" Darius smirked. "Well, you can barely walk right now, and I doubt you know where to go on this planet. Like it or not, you're stuck with me." Rilia's expression softened for a brief moment before she nodded. "All right. But where will we go?" Darius thought for a moment. His squad was nearby, but they had already made it clear that it wouldn't help him if he insisted on protecting Rilia. He needed a safe way out of the war zone. "There's an old human outpost about 50 kilometers north," he said finally. "It was abandoned months ago, but I know a few supply caches are still there. If we can reach it, we might find a way to contact someone who can get us out." Rilia's face darkened. 50 kilometers. Darius smirked. "That's nothing." "For a fully armed soldier, maybe," she muttered. "But in case you haven't noticed, I'm not exactly at full strength." Darius shrugged. "Then I guess I'll just have to carry you when you get tired." She blinked, staring at him like he was insane. "You can't be serious." Darius grinned. "You'll see." A few hours later, under the cover of darkness, they left the bunker. Darius moved carefully, keeping his rifle ready. The ruins were dangerous, not just because of the enemy, but also because scavengers and rogue mercenaries roamed the area, looking for anything valuable. Rilia followed close behind, her breathing slightly unsteady. She was still weak, but she was determined to keep up. For a while, they walked in silence. But then, a distant rumbling sound broke the stillness of the night. Darius immediately pulled Rilia into the shadows of a collapsed building, pressing a finger to his lips. "Stay quiet." She barely had time to respond before a Valeri patrol came into view. Darius cursed under his breath. They were heavily armed, their sleek armor reflecting the moonlight. But what caught his attention was the device they carried. A tracker. "They're scanning for life signs," Rilia whispered. Darius's grip tightened on his weapon. If that scanner picked them up, they would be surrounded in minutes. Rilia's breathing became shallow. "They're looking for me." Darius glanced at her. She was terrified. He made a decision. "Stay here. No matter what happens, don't move." Before she could argue, he moved silently toward the patrol, sticking to the shadows. The leader of the group stopped, glancing at the scanner. I'm picking up faint signals. Darius smirked. That was his cue. He pulled out a small decoy device, a gadget designed to send out fake life readings. He tossed it behind a distant pile of rubble. The tracker immediately reacted, and the soldiers turned in that direction. It's over there, one of them barked. Darius grabbed Rilia's arm. Now, move. They slipped away as the patrol rushed toward the fake signal. The moment they were far enough, Darius exhaled in relief. Rilia stared at him in shock. You tricked them. Darius grinned. Welcome to human tactics. For the first time since they met, Rilia actually smiled. But their journey wasn't over yet. The Valeri were still hunting her, and the war-torn planet was full of dangers. They still had 50 kilometers to go, and Darius knew the real fight was just beginning. The night was cold, and the ruins stretched endlessly around them like the bones of a forgotten civilization. Darius Cole led the way, his rifle held tightly, scanning for any movement. Rilia followed behind, struggling to keep up. She was still weak, her wounds slowing her down, but she refused to complain. They had managed to escape the Valeri patrol, but they both knew the enemy was still searching. The tracker had been fooled once, but it wouldn't take long before the soldiers realized the trick. Darius glanced at Rilia. She was breathing heavily, her steps unsteady. He sighed. All right, that's enough. We need to rest. Rilia shook her head. No, we need to keep moving. Darius crossed his arms. And what happens if you collapse? Do I carry you the whole way? Rilia looked away. She hated feeling weak, but she knew he was right. With a reluctant nod, she sat down on a large piece of broken concrete, rubbing her aching legs. Darius knelt beside her and pulled out a ration pack from his gear, handing it to her. Eat, he said. She hesitated, staring at the package. Human food. Darius smirked. It won't kill you. Rilia carefully opened the packet and sniffed the contents. It didn't smell bad, just different. Taking a small bite, she chewed slowly, her expression unreadable. Darius watched her. Well, she swallowed and blinked. It's strange, but not bad. He chuckled. That's the best compliment I've heard about rations. For the first time since they met, the tension between them seemed to ease. Rilia stared at the flickering remains of a streetlight in the distance. I don't understand you, she admitted. Darius raised an eyebrow. What part? She turned to him. All of it. Why you saved me. Why you're helping me. Why you trust me. Darius exhaled, leaning back against a broken wall. Trust is a strong word. Let's just say I don't think you deserve to die out here. Rilia frowned. You should hate me. Darius shrugged. Should I? She nodded. Humans and Valeri have been fighting for years. My people see yours as less inferior. Darius smirked. Funny. Some humans say the same about your kind. Rilia lowered her gaze. And yet you saved me. Darius looked at her for a moment before speaking. I've seen enough war to know one thing. Not everyone deserves to suffer for the mistakes of their leaders. She was silent. Then, quietly, she said, I never wanted to be part of this war. Darius's expression softened. Then why were you? She hesitated, then sighed. I was born into it. My family was part of the military caste. I never had a choice. She clenched her fists. And when I failed my mission, they abandoned me. Like I was nothing. Darius leaned forward. They were wrong. Rilia looked at him, surprised by his words. You're not nothing, he continued. You survived. That means something. She swallowed hard. For so long, she had felt worthless, useless. But here was a human soldier, telling her that she mattered. Before she could respond, a sound echoed in the distance, metal scraping against stone. Darius's instincts kicked in. He grabbed his rifle and motioned for Rilia to stay quiet. She nodded, holding her breath. He moved to the edge of their hiding spot, peering into the darkness. His grip on his weapon tightened. Shadows shifted. Something was out there. Darius turned back to Rilia. "We need to move. Now." She nodded, forcing herself to stand. They stayed low, moving carefully through the ruins. Every step felt like a gamble. Then, a voice rang out. "Find the traitor." She was spotted heading north. Rilia's blood ran cold. They were close. Darius grabbed her wrist and pulled her into a nearby alley. "Stay close," he whispered. The two of them moved quickly, slipping through the ruins like ghosts. But the enemy was getting closer. Rilia's heart pounded. She had spent her whole life among the Valari, believing in their strength. Now, they were hunting her like an animal. Suddenly, Darius stopped. He turned to her and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "Listen to me," he whispered. "We will get out of this. I promise." She stared at him, searching for any sign of doubt. There was none. For the first time in her life, she wanted to believe someone. Taking a deep breath, she nodded. "All right." Darius gave her a small, confident grin. "Good. Let's show your people that humans aren't as weak as they think." Rilia smirked, a hint of fire returning to her eyes. And with that, they vanished into the night, the hunt for survival truly beginning. The night was quiet, but Darius knew better than to trust the silence. It was the kind that came before danger struck. He and Rilia moved quickly through the ruins, their footsteps muffled by the dust-covered ground. The abandoned human outpost was still miles away, and the Valari hunters were getting closer. Darius stole a glance at Rilia. She was breathing heavily, her body still weak from her wounds. He could see the exhaustion in her silver eyes, but she didn't complain. He admired that about her. She refused to give up. "We need to keep moving," he whispered, scanning the area ahead. Rilia nodded, though her legs were trembling. "How much farther?" Darius checked his holomap. 15 kilometers. She sighed, shaking her head. "That's still too far." Darius looked at her, then at the broken road ahead. He knew she wouldn't make it if they kept this pace. They needed a faster way to move. That's when he saw it, a rusted military speeder, half buried under debris. It was old, but if it still had power, it could help them cover the distance much faster. "Stay here," Darius said, moving toward the speeder. Rilia frowned. "What are you doing?" He didn't answer. Instead, he wiped the dust off the control panel and pressed the power button. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low hum. Darius smirked. "Still works." Rilia's eyes widened. "You humans really never throw anything away, do you?" He chuckled. "We call it being resourceful." With some quick rewiring, the speeder's engine came to life, dim lights flickering as the controls activated. Darius jumped onto the driver's seat and motioned to Rilia. "Get in." She hesitated. "Are you sure this thing won't fall apart while we're on it?" He smirked. "Only one way to find out." She rolled her eyes but climbed in behind him. As soon as she was secured, Darius hit the accelerator. The speeder lurched forward, kicking up dust as it sped down the ruined road. For the first time in hours, they were finally putting real distance between them and the enemy. The chase begins. For a while, they rode in silence, the wind rushing past them. The landscape was nothing but destroyed buildings and scorched earth, a reminder of the war that had torn this world apart. Darius focused on the road ahead, but Rilia kept looking behind them, her expression tense. Then she froze. "Darius." He glanced at her. "What?" Her voice was tight with fear. "They found us." Darius looked over his shoulder, his stomach clenched. A Valari patrol ship was closing in fast, its bright blue thrusters cutting through the darkness. Darius cursed under his breath. "They have speed," Rilia said. "We can't outrun them." "Then we outsmart them." Darius gripped the controls tighter and swerved the speeder off the main road, heading toward the wreckage of an old battlefield. The patrol ship followed, its spotlights searching for them. They're locking onto us, Relia shouted. Darius saw the telltale red targeting beam flickering over them. In a few seconds, the patrol ship would fire. Thinking fast, he pulled a sharp turn, heading straight for a massive collapsed starship lying in the ruins. "Are you crazy?" Relia yelled. "Trust me." The speeder raced forward, heading for a narrow opening in the wreckage. The Valeri ship fired, but missed as Darius shot through the gap just in time. The patrol ship tried to follow, but the opening was too small. It clipped the edge of the wreck, sending it spinning off course. Darius and Relia sped out on the other side, leaving the patrol ship struggling to regain control. Darius grinned. "Told you." Relia's breath was unsteady. "Remind me never to question your driving again." The outpost. The rest of the journey was tense, but the enemy didn't find them again. When they finally reached the abandoned outpost, Darius parked the speeder and scanned the surroundings. The outpost was in bad shape, but its communication tower was still standing. "We made it," Darius said, relieved. Relia slowly climbed out of the speeder, looking up at the old structure. "And now we call for help." Darius led her inside the outpost, activating the emergency transmitter. He sent out a coded signal to the nearest human base. Minutes passed. Then, a response came through. A familiar voice crackled over the radio. "Commander Cole, what the hell have you done?" Darius exhaled. They had found a way off this planet. But what came next was uncertain. The emergency signal had been sent, but the response from human command was far from comforting. Darius had been expecting help, but what he got was far more complicated than he had imagined. "Commander Cole," the voice on the radio crackled, sharp and stern. "We've received your signal, but your actions have put us in a difficult position. You're bringing back an alien traitor. You know the rules." Darius clenched his jaw. He had expected resistance, but he hadn't realized how much trouble this would cause. "I didn't sign up to leave anyone behind," he said, his voice steady. "I'm bringing her in, whether you like it or not." There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice returned, grudgingly respectful. "Understood. But you have 20 minutes before we move to secure the area. We'll be ready to extract you both." Darius exhaled, the weight of the decision settling deeper on his shoulders. He glanced over at Relia, who had been quietly sitting by the communication console. Her eyes were locked on the signal, but she didn't say a word. She knew what was coming. The moment they arrived at the outpost, Darius had assumed that their troubles were over. But now reality had set in. Human command would want answers, and Relia was still a fugitive in the eyes of the Valeri Empire. Darius walked over to her, sitting down beside her. "You heard them." Relia didn't look at him. "I heard." "I'm sorry," he said, his voice soft but sincere. "Sorry," she repeated, a flicker of disbelief in her eyes. "For what?" He rubbed his face, frustrated. "I didn't think it would be this complicated. They're not going to just let you go. You'll have to answer to human command. And the Valeri." He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I know," she whispered. "I never thought I'd have a choice. But you gave me one." She finally looked at him, her silver eyes filled with an emotion Darius hadn't expected. Gratitude. Darius nodded slowly. He understood now. The journey had never been just about survival. It had been about hope. The enemy closes in. The distant rumble of an incoming shuttle reached their ears. Darius immediately stood, his instincts on high alert. "They're early." Relia's eyes flicked to the entrance. "Is it them?" "No," Darius said quickly, but the alarm bells in his mind were ringing louder. He stepped toward the back of the outpost, motioning for Relia to follow. "Stay low. There's something off about this." The moment they stepped outside, Darius's worst fears were confirmed. A Valeri battle cruiser appeared in the sky, its sleek silhouette cutting through the clouds like a shadow. It hovered above the outpost, a low hum of energy pulsing from its engines. "Damn it," Darius muttered. They found us. Relia turned pale. How? They must have tracked the signal. The patrol ships must have gotten a fix on our location after I sent the signal. Darius quickly scanned the area. They were exposed here. They needed cover, and fast. He grabbed her arm and pulled her toward a nearby collapsed structure. We're not going down without a fight. A battle for survival. The moment they took cover, the Valeri ship fired, explosions shaking the ground as debris flew in every direction. Darius winced, but he stayed focused. He had to think fast. Stay low, he shouted at Relia. The alien girl crouched next to him, trying to control her breathing. Her body still hadn't fully healed, but she was determined to stand by his side. What's the plan? Darius's mind was working quickly. They were surrounded by ruins, and the Valeri ship's weaponry would turn this outpost into rubble if they didn't act fast. We need to disable their targeting systems. Relia looked at him, confused. How? Darius pointed to a signal relay tower that loomed in the distance. I'll draw their fire. You take out that relay. It'll cut off their targeting systems, and we can fight back. She looked at him, fear flashing in her eyes. What if I don't make it? You will, he said firmly. Trust me. Without waiting for a response, Darius jumped from their cover and sprinted toward the open area, taking aim at the enemy ship. As he fired his rifle, he could see the ship's shields flashing under the impact. He wasn't going to destroy it, but he had to keep them distracted long enough for Relia to complete her task. The final push. Relia moved swiftly, her alien agility allowing her to slip through the wreckage unnoticed. The Valeri soldiers on the cruiser were so focused on Darius's attack that they didn't notice her until she was right beneath the signal tower. With quick, precise movements, Relia accessed the tower's control panel and began to hack into the system. Her fingers moved with skill, but she knew the ship's security would try to stop her. Time was running out. Back at the wreckage, Darius fired again, taking down a few of the Valeri soldiers attempting to target him. Sweat dripped down his face, but his focus was sharp. He couldn't afford to miss. Not now. Just as the battle cruiser started to adjust its position to aim at Darius again, a loud crackle came through the air. The Valeri ship's targeting system shut down. The ship's weapons flared uselessly in the air. Now Darius. Rilia's voice came through the comms. It's done. Darius grinned. Time to finish this. With the Valeri ship temporarily disabled, Darius launched his final assault, taking down the remaining soldiers and creating a path to escape. Relia, already catching her breath, stood next to him, her eyes burning with fierce determination. Let's go. The battle was over. The Valeri cruiser, disabled and stranded, was nothing more than a hulking shadow against the dark sky. Smoke billowed from the ship's broken weapon systems, and the wreckage of the outpost was littered with the aftermath of the conflict. The distant hum of a human extraction shuttle could be heard as it descended from the sky, but Darius, Cole, and Relia were still in the heart of the destruction, both survivors, but for how long? Darius scanned the horizon, his rifle still in his hands. The Valeri soldiers had retreated or been neutralized, but Darius knew their defeat wasn't permanent. The Empire would send more, and soon. The question was, how much longer could they hold out before help arrived? We need to move, Darius said, his voice steady but urgent. Relia, standing beside him, was catching her breath, her body still feeling the strain of the battle. But her eyes were sharp, scanning the wreckage for any signs of further danger. She nodded, the trust between them stronger than ever, even though their situation had never been so dire. They moved quickly, with Darius leading the way through the rubble. The journey to the extraction point was perilous, but they had little choice. The shuttle had to pick them up soon, before more enemy forces arrived. As they ran, Relia glanced at Darius. "Do you ever stop fighting?" she asked, her voice quiet but curious. He glanced at her with a slight smirk. "Not until the job's done." "And what about me?" she asked, her question hanging in the air. Darius's smirk faded. He had thought about it, but it was hard to admit. She was the reason he was still fighting. Her life was no longer just a mission. "Don't get too ahead of yourself," he said, trying to keep his voice light, but the emotion in it was clear. "Let's get you out of here first." Rillia's eyes softened, a fleeting moment of vulnerability passing over her face. She knew what he meant. She had never expected anyone to stand by her, especially not a human soldier. And yet here she was, running for her life with him, hoping for something more, something she had long believed was impossible. The final approach. The shuttle came into view, a human dropship, sleek and fast, descending toward the wrecked outpost. Darius's heart rate quickened. They were so close. But just as they reached the clearing, the unmistakable sound of engines roared to life. Another Valeri ship, this one faster and more agile, appeared in the distance, bearing down on them at incredible speed. "Get down," Darius shouted, pulling Rillia to the ground. The Valeri ship had spotted them, and it was not wasting any time. Rillia's breath caught in her throat as the ship's lasers fired, tearing through the landscape and hitting the ground mere feet from where they lay. "They won't stop," she said, fear creeping into her voice. "They never do," Darius said, as his instincts kicked in. "We need to make it to the shuttle now." But the ship wasn't going to give them a chance. The laser fire intensified, and it was clear that they were being targeted. The shuttle would be in danger if it got too close. Darius cursed under his breath. "I'll hold them off." Rillia's eyes widened. "No, Darius. Stay behind me." Without another word, he grabbed his weapon and sprinted toward the shuttle's landing zone, firing at the approaching Valeri ship. The laser blasts sizzled through the air, but he didn't flinch. He had one goal now: keep them alive long enough for the shuttle to get to safety. The moment of choice. The Valeri ship hovered just above the ground, its cannon locked onto Darius. The pressure was immense, the noise deafening as the laser aimed directly at him. Rillia, from her position behind cover, could feel her heart pound in her chest. She could feel the weight of his sacrifice, knowing that without him, she would never have made it this far. Then, something inside her snapped. She couldn't let him die. She couldn't let this human who had given everything to help her be torn apart. She stood up, adrenaline rushing through her. "Darius." He turned just as she charged toward him. Her eyes were fierce, and for the first time, she felt the power of the decision she was about to make. Rillia pushed Darius aside, her energy channeling into her own attack. She stretched out her hand toward the hovering ship, her fingers glowing with the energy of her people, a power that had been locked away, hidden deep inside her since her childhood. In a single moment, the ship's laser fire stopped. Darius's eyes widened as he watched the ship falter in midair. The powerful energy of Rillia's abilities ripped through the ship's engines, sending it spiraling out of control. With a deafening crash, the Valeri ship plummeted to the ground, its firepower silenced. For a moment, everything was still. The escape. The human shuttle descended, the ramp lowering just in time for them to run inside. Darius grabbed Rillia's hand, pulling her into the safe zone as the doors closed behind them. Once inside, the shuttle quickly ascended, the wreckage of the battlefield shrinking beneath them. Darius exhaled, finally feeling the weight of their survival. Rillia, her breath still shallow from the exertion, turned to him. "I didn't know I could do that," she whispered, looking at her hands in awe. Darius smiled. "You're a fighter, Rillia. You always have been." She looked at him, her silver eyes meeting his. For a moment, words failed them both. They had survived against all odds, but more than that, they had found something that neither of them expected: a sense of trust, a bond, and perhaps even something deeper. As the shuttle soared higher, leaving the broken world behind, Darius knew this was just the beginning. And no matter what came next, they would face it together.